What can we do? Well, there is a process. It involves invoking Article 5 of the Constitution that would call for a convention of states. It's a fascinating concept that has been championed and spearheaded by a number of people that I respect very, very highly. Dr. John Eastman from the National Organization of Marriage, a constitutional law scholar, is a part of this movement. Several million people in the United States are signing up for and asking for and calling their state representatives to ask for this convention of states that would basically, this is an oversimplified version of this, but the convention of states would basically involve, the federal government is overreaching its constitutionally established boundaries. So Article 5 says we can call a convention of states to restrict the power and jurisdiction of the federal government. And in doing so, this is not some grassroots, torches and pitchforks moment. This is something that the Constitution provides for in the event that the federal government grows too big and too unruly for its own good. Dr. Tom Coburn was a Republican congressman from Oklahoma back in the 1990s. He was the junior senator from Oklahoma in the 2000s. In January 2014, he announced that he would retire before the expiration of his final term, and he did so based on principle. He said, look, fiscal conservative, but I also believe in term limits. And since we don't have term limits in the House or Senate, he promised he'd run for 3 terms in the House. He ran all 3, won all 3, and at the end of his 3rd year said, I'm out. Same thing with the Senate. He's now become a leading spokesman for this organization of, trying to get the Convention of States to become a reality in the U.S. And I think it's a very, very necessary measure. It's necessary because we are at a point right now where it seems like Washington, D.C. is out of control. And the reason it's necessary now is because I'm not saying that, 4 or 5 months on the job, you haven't seen from President Trump what he said he was going to do in terms of draining the swamp. But how do you smash the D.C. monopoly? How do you get the career politicians out and return the power to the people? How do you cut government waste and government spending? Senator Coburn used to publish a report every year about government waste and government spending that was fantastic. I used to love reading it. I'm sorry he's not in office anymore, but I think he's got a greater calling now and a more noble stance. I've invited him to come on the program here to discuss this new book that he's written, Smashing the D.C. Monopoly, but also to explain what a convention of states is and why you would want to go to conventionofstates.com and sign up and get this happening. It's a grassroots movement, basically just to say we want the career politicos get out of the way so that we can have the government run the way it needs to run. The government needs to go on a diet. This is a good way to do it. Senator Tom Coburn, Smashing the D.C. Monopoly. That's our topic of conversation today here on The Bottom Line. There's a lot of talk, and one of my favorite expressions is, that's not constitutional. And I love to hear people who don't really have a full grasp of the Constitution make a claim like that. I'll be the first to admit, I'm not a constitutional scholar either. However, there's something that has come up called a convention of states that has got a lot of people buzzing about, is it constitutional? How do we put something like this together? And so today here on The Bottom Line, I'm going to talk to an expert about the convention of states. And the expert is Dr. Tom Coburn, who many of you remember as a member of the Senate in the 2000s and a member of the House before that, actually a practicing physician in Oklahoma right up until a couple of years ago. And Dr. Coburn is the author of a brand new book called Smashing the D.C. Monopoly. Dr. Tom Coburn, welcome to The Bottom Line Show today.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Is it kind of a prerequisite if you're running for office in Oklahoma that you have to have a medical license first? I mean, it seems like, no, isn't Langford's? Oh, he's a pastor. I mean,
no, he's a pastor.
He's a pastor. Okay,
yeah.
Good. For some reason, I was thinking it's great to have medical, but Bill Frist. I mean, there are people who served in Congress before who have medical backgrounds, and I always admire the fact that you say, okay, I want to find something that's a bit less challenging than practicing medicine. I'll go to Congress. Is that how that works? Maybe, maybe not. Anyway.
Well, that's one observation.
Okay,
let's just put it that way.
Okay, we'll leave it at that. What compelled you to get into the congressional world back in the 90s?
My dad raised me understanding the freedoms that we had and the importance of maintaining that. He was a child of the Depression, was born in a mud hut in the plains of Colorado. His father went to prison when he was 11. He worked his way up, and he became a very successful businessman because of the opportunities of the freedom that we have. And, I mean, he ingrained the work ethic in me and freedom. And as I sat and practiced medicine in the mid-'90s, I started seeing that freedom slip away. And, of course, it's gone much further than that today than what it had at that time. And so I just decided, somebody besides a politician ought to get into this.
Amen.
And so I ran in a district that had 84% Democratic registration and won as a Republican first time in over 100 years that a Republican had held that seat. And then retired. I adamantly believe in term limits. It's the thing that keeps you from growing in office in your arrogance. And then returned to my practice for 4 years, and then ran for the Senate, and then left early because of what I decided is we aren't going to fix our problems in Washington. We're going to have to fix them.
Well, and that was one of the rallying cries of the 2016 federal, national election was we have to drain the swamp. There's too many problems, and I know there was a growing frustration, especially from the center right moderate and also the hard right fundamentalists who just said, "Wow, we keep electing these people and they go to office, and 2010." Had a good run, 2012, 2014, and nothing seems to change. And from someone who's been in on the inside, as you, Senator Coburn and Congressman Coburn and Dr. Coburn, you walked out of there and said, okay, we've got to do something different because is Washington reparable in its current state?
I don't think so. Not if we keep sending the same type individuals. 2/3 of the Congress are careerists. In other words, they don't really have the broad experience and judgment of life outside of politics. And I want to tell you, the views inside of politics are circular, one, and limited, and really infected with arrogance. And so, the facts is our country's sick. We have a fever, and we need to be about fixing it. And I tried multiple ways. I was very active in the Senate in terms of passing legislation, doing things, working across the aisle. But I came to the realization that we're not going to create a future for our kids unless we do something different than what we're doing now, because it's out of balance.
I recall vividly the times that I would get those email alerts and those text message alerts that said, well, Senator Coburn and his crowd have identified more, not necessarily corruption, but just wasteful spending. And it seemed like it took someone, like you said, from the outside who understands the business applications to ask questions like, why are we spending $100 million on this? Or why are we throwing $2 billion at that? But it sounds like, in this career politician type of thing, that sounds like it's on both sides of the aisle.
Oh, it is. And remember, waste and stupidity has a constituency.
Yes, it does. It definitely does.
And so if your number one goal is to get reelected, the last thing you're going to do is lessen the spending that's going into your state by claiming something is either inappropriate or unconstitutional or outside the realm of good governance. And so when I identified $400 billion in waste, fraud, duplication, and stupidity that was spent every year. And I'd go to both members of the Senate on my side and on the other side and say, help me get rid of this. Oh, no. There are people that depend on that. And I said, well, it's wasteful. It's not appropriate. It doesn't work. It doesn't matter. So the fact is people refuse to do the hard work of making hard choices because it might impact their election. And that's the very point. Our original founders and original representatives went up there because they were trusted, and they worked to build trust from their constituency, not popularity, not vanity, not expediency, but trust. And when you build trust, people don't have to agree with you, but they trust you.
Absolutely.
And what we have is a different type of thing today. I got to be politically expedient, and I've got to be popular, and if I'm those two things, I can get reelected. And so the question is, what's happening to our country while all the politicians want to get reelected and want to be popular?
Wow, and you talk about that constituency, and it is definitely there, and there's a monster to be fed, and a lot of people are more than willing to feed it and keep that continual going on. Senator Tom Coburn with me today here on The Bottom Line, smashing the D.C. monopoly, using Article 5 to restore freedom and to stop runaway government is the book. We've got a link up for it at thebottomlineshow.com. Let's talk about Article 5 for just a moment specifically, or generally first, what is in it, if you can give us a summary of that, and then why would we use this in this Convention of States process to do what Congress isn't willing to do for itself and for us on its own?
Well, I think the history is really important. First of all, the Constitutional Convention came about through an amendments convention that was held in Annapolis, Maryland, and was attended by 5 states, and that's where the call for our Constitutional Convention came from. So this historically was used oftentimes in both states and with the Articles of Confederation that the government at that time had. So what an Article 5 is when they met in the Constitution, the first thing they said was we have to figure out, whatever we do here, we have to figure out a way to make sure that the people in the long term have a way to limit the power of the federal government. And George Mason stood up and said, do we know of any time in history where a government voluntarily ceded its power back to the people? So they wrote the first component of Article 5, and it wasn't until late in the convention that they actually added the opportunity for the Congress to modify the Constitution. So in Article 5, there's 2 ways in which the Constitution can be modified. One is by a 2/3 vote of both houses, which is then sent to the states, and 38 states, 3/4 of the states, have to agree to that modification of the Constitution. But the original Article 5 says the states can call an amendments convention, and if 2/3 of those states agree that we ought to have an amendments convention over specific topics, then the Congress has to call an amendments convention of the states. So even though it takes only 34 states to call an amendments convention, all states are represented, and each state gets 1 vote. And the only things that can be considered in that convention are what are in the realm of the application. And the applications have to be essentially identical. So what we have is a way for us to make the hard choices to fix our country. I mean, the real question in my mind is who gets to decide about our freedom in the future? Is it an unelected bureaucrat or a 5-4 decision of the Supreme Court? Or should I decide? Whether I'm a liberal or a conservative, most people think I ought to be deciding these issues rather than somebody in Washington. And so what we have is a large movement, about 2.2 million people, growing at about 50,000 people a week, who are signing up to the Convention of States to actually lobby their state legislatures to ask and submit a joint resolution of their state legislatures to have an amendments convention. 4 states did that this year. 1 still may do it. North Carolina still may do it yet this year. So that would put us at 13 out of the 34. Once you have 34, the Congress calls this amendments convention, and the states send whoever they want. They can send 1 or they can send 50 people, but they only get 1 vote. And only the areas that have been listed in the application can be considered. And then once that's made, then whatever those recommendations are, the Congress forwards those recommendations to the states.
Former Senator Tom Coburn with me today here on The Bottom Line. I'm Roger Marsh. We're talking about a convention of states, and that's so much material to process, and yet you explained it so succinctly. I was thinking about, as you mentioned, the 34 states necessary to get this, amendments gathering together, and I realized that does give some hope to people who are listening to this program who live in very liberal states right now, very, very progressive states, if you were, who would say, well, we don't, we're in control, so why would we want to have something like this? We like the status quo. It does give us some hope that you can count on the other states with 13 so far and potentially growing later this year.
Well, if you think about it, if you're a progressive and what you see right now, Republicans and President Trump, in Washington, you might want to say more decisions ought to be made in your state
Good
if
point.
you want to keep those progressive values.
Very good point.
So the whole idea is to restore. We're not talking about changing our country. We're talking about restoring the principles of federalism. Yeah. We're talking about restoring the balance of power between the three branches of the federal government, which are totally unbalanced now, with the courts being number one, the president being number two, the bureaucratic branch number three, and Congress ceding all its power to those three. So we really don't have much representation in the federal government. And so it's about reestablishing what was intended for our founders.
Senator Coburn, you're giving us a lot to think about, and I know you've written a new book on this project called Smashing the D.C. Monopoly. We have a link up for that book at thebottomlineshow.com. Senator Tom Coburn with me today here on the program. We're talking about the Convention of States here on The Bottom Line. What exactly is a convention of states, and why do we need one? Right now on the Bottom Line Show today, I'm Roger Marsh, joined for this special segment by Dr. Tom Coburn, former congressman from Oklahoma, former senator from Oklahoma, and a big proponent of moving the bottom line into Oklahoma. Senator Coburn, do you know anybody you can make a few phone calls and see if there are stations that would like to pick up the show in Oklahoma too?
I certainly can. As a matter of fact, we need to talk later about that.
We'll do that off the air. Dr. Coburn, with a medical practice background, and I still marvel at the fact that you maintained your medical practice all throughout your time in the House and also in the Senate, and only recently retired from that a couple years ago. You shared in the first segment a very inspiring story about what your dad had to go through in terms of the hard knock life, that the hand that he was dealt and the way he was able to pull himself up. I realize that faith plays a big component in your life too. Talk about your faith journey here and why this American dream for you in terms of your working and your congressional life, but also it's a reflection of your faith too.
Well, we're taught that the interaction in this world is about loving our neighbor. Jesus said every other commandment is based on two things: loving God with all your heart, mind, and soul, and loving your neighbor. And servant leadership is a part of that. And so standing up and being able to be hit and be criticized and not allowing that to impact you, because the value that you have is that God loves you, that a tremendous price was paid for you and all your inconsistencies and inadequacies and failures, and yet you can still go out there and smile every day at the people that are very critical of you because God loves you. And your self-esteem comes from your faith, not from your position. And so it's easier then to give away your life to other people, knowing that life is only of value because God loves you.
Well, what you were able to accomplish in your run for the Senate and your run for the House out of Oklahoma, got the precedent continuing now with Senator James Langford,
you bet,
a former
wonderful
pastor.
Man.
Yeah, what a great legacy there as you pass the baton to him.
You bet, and he's done a wonderful job for Oklahoma.
Okay, is it true that Democrats in Congress used to call you Dr. No? I just wanted to ask that.
Well, sure it is, because I said, why would we do things that are stupid? Right. And why would we spend money that we don't have on things that we don't absolutely need?
Sure.
I raised the question. My side called me the conscience of the Senate. The Democrats called me Dr. No. But the fact is you got to be able to explain. And so before I left, about a year and a half before I left, nobody would debate me on the other side because they didn't want to get asked the hard questions of why, how. How do you justify that? The question the left asks all the time is, what about the people falling through the cracks?
Yeah.
Well, I have a new story for them. The fact is we have 85 million millennials, the largest geographic that we have, demographic that we have, and they're going to fall through the cracks because the people in Congress refuse to make the hard choices that are necessary for our country's future survival and standard of living. So when you claim you're out for this little guy and you're ignoring 85 million millennials because we've harnessed them with a load of debt that will be untenable to their living standards, you have no longer any place with which to stand. Because you're sitting there voting, spending all this money, taking away their, claiming that you're here to help people here and now.
Right. Well,
and that goes back to the real problem. Marvin Lasky wrote a great book some 25 years ago called The Tragedy of American Compassion. And your listeners ought to read that book. because it actually, here I am touting his book when I want to be touting my
yours, right?
But the point is he talks about how America did take care of people, but they didn't undermine personal responsibility. Our founders never would have undermined personal responsibility. Mm-hmm. And so that's why, for example, Congress didn't pass eliminating the Affordable Care Act, because so many moderate Republicans saw that Medicaid was expanded, and they couldn't dare take that away, even though half of it was fraud. Mm-hmm. Because, they wanted to get reelected. So the point comes, it all comes full circle. And the full circle is this. America's in trouble. We're running a fever. We need to diagnose the disease. The disease is way too much government, limiting of our freedoms and our guarantees of freedom by ever-expanding non-benevolent federal government that takes away our future. And the way to solve that is the way our founders gave us, because they knew we would be here. And people always say, "Well, what about this? What about this?" Well, look, my question always back to them is, we have a runaway federal government right now that's out of control. We don't have elected representatives that are willing to make the tough votes to put it back in control. So we, in fact, ought to offer amendments that would balance the budget using the same type of accounting we all have to use, and limit on the tax increases that come, so we can force the career politician to make a choice. And then when they come home and they can say, "I had to," we have a balanced budget amendment. Yeah. And then limiting the scope and jurisdiction. Most people don't realize that in your state, I don't know about California, but in all the rest of the states, 60% of the money they raise in their state is actually controlled by a bureaucrat in Washington, whether it's Department of Education, whether it's their clean water, all these other things that they do, whether it's how they build a highway. In other words, the federal government is there controlling how you spend your own money rather than your state legislature getting to decide how it's spent. So we've lost the very limited freedoms that remain as the government grows and grows and grows. And then finally, limiting the terms of both elected and elected and appointed federal officials will do wonders. The way to control Congress is to take away the pension. Mm-hmm. If there's no pension, you're going to have very few career politicians. Right. And so what we have is people in positions that refuse to make the hard choices because they're thinking about them ahead of us. That's not servant leadership. Mm-hmm. We have a government that told us last year that the budget deficit was $580 billion, but the debt went up $1.6 trillion. That doesn't fit on any. I'm an accountant first before I was ever a physician, and that's my degree. That doesn't fit. And the unfunded liabilities rose $6 trillion last year that our millennials are going to have to pay. Mm-hmm. So none of that fits. So they cheat. They don't tell. They're not honest with what is going on. And then all you have to do is look at the waste, fraud, duplication. I understand President Trump's going to talk about job programs today. Mm-hmm. There's 47 different job training programs run by the federal government.
Good night.
Okay. It's $15.6 billion a year, and the government accountability offices, not one of them is effective in terms of training workers for a permanent job.
Wow. That seems like a good place to...
Why would we do that? Why hasn't Congress fixed that? They did fix it. They took it from 49 to 47.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and and it was nothing but a whitewash.
Yeah.
And I didn't vote for it, and I did all the research on what we had in terms of job training programs. So that's just a simple example of why we as American citizens should have the hope that we can actually fix it. When I talk to people who don't know about Article 5, a sparkle comes in their eye. A smile comes in their face. We can actually fix this.
Yes.
And we can, but it requires us as Americans signing up, becoming part of this army of 2.2 million people, and impacting our legislators at the state level saying, we want you to do this.
Yes.
We want a joint resolution that says we want an Article 5 Amendments Convention. We want these three things, and we're willing to sign up, tell our neighbors, get them to sign up with a convention of states. Read this book because it'll give you the tools to know what our founders thought, what the history was, and how we go about achieving this.
Senator Coburn, you touted Marvin Olasky's book, so now I'm going to tout yours because Proverbs 27 says, somebody else should praise you. So I'm going to go ahead and praise you for just a moment here. Smashing the D.C. Monopoly is the book by Senator Tom Coburn. We've got a link up at thebottomlineshow.com. This Convention of States concept is growing in momentum. I know there are about 50,000 people in California who've signed up for this. I mean, all over across the country, it's over 2.2 million and growing. And the fact that I'm encouraged by the fact that 13 states have actually done this, and we 21 more, and all of a sudden this is a serious conversation here. But it took somebody like you to go in, spend 15 years on Capitol Hill, come out, and then say, okay, wait a minute. You're not going to fix it in there. The only way you're going to fix it is from the outside, and we, the people, retaking the reins again. 60 seconds left, Senator Coburn. Make your best pitch for why where's a website we can go to? We can look at it.
It's conventionofstates.com.
Okay.
You can go to that website. You can learn all about it. You can read this book. We'll give you the history, the knowledge, and what we need to do to fix our country, how we restore our freedom, and how we limit a runaway government. And we can actually fix what's wrong. And if we don't do it, then we're not going to cheat history, and we're going to be like every other republic before us. We're going to fail.
No.
And that is not a pretty sight. And all you have to do is talk to some very smart economists that know right now we can't continue to live on $1 trillion of borrowed money a year without tremendous consequences to our kids.
I can see why they called you Dr. No, and I can see why people look at your positions too and say, but gosh, that just sounds so hurtful and mean and awful. But I liken it to you with the stethoscope and the white lab coat saying, okay, here's the prognosis, here's the diagnosis, but here's the treatment. Here's the remedy. And it doesn't just stop at I have bad news. The good news is we can fix this.
And here's the other thing. A convention of states fixes the real disease and doesn't treat the symptoms like the politicians do. We're actually going to cut the cancer out. We're going to limit the ability of your hypertension to continue to hurt you and cause you to have a stroke. Mm-hmm. We're going to actually fix the real diseases that are there rather than look good but do nothing.
I'm sure Big Pharma doesn't like you much either.
Well, Big Pharma isn't the biggest problem. Our problem, I'll just give you a real quick one. If you had true price discovery in healthcare tomorrow, everywhere, and you didn't have third-party payers, the price of healthcare in America would be a third lower.
Wow.
And that's backed up by studies.
One fell swoop. Amazing.
One fell swoop. That's all the Senate has to do. Mandate price discovery, and you'll eventually get outcome discovery, and people will know what things cost, and all of a sudden they'll be smart. Look at the Amish community. They buy health care at a 50% lower than everybody else in this country.
Right, because they know the cost, they know the prices, and they can work those directly with the providers.
You bet.
Yeah, I love it. That's great. Well, can we get you back into Congress at some point, sir?
No, I'm pretty well through. I love being around 8 grandkids. It's fun.
Good for you.
And I'm having a ball.
Good for you.
But I really thank you for the time. And I hope your listeners will pick up this book and become educated about this, because this is the only way we're going to fix the real problems in Washington.
Senator Tom Coburn, the book is called Smashing the D.C. Monopoly. The book and the link for conventionofstates.com are up at thebottomlineshow.com. Dr. Coburn, great to know you. Thanks for being with me on the program.
You bet. God bless you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And get us on in Oklahoma. We're expanding right now, and we'd love to take this message wherever it will be heard and basically wherever it will be helpful. That's why I'm encouraged about this Convention of States movement, is because it's not violent, it's not hurtful, it doesn't involve profanity, it doesn't involve overturning cop cars and throwing rocks through windows on college campuses, it doesn't involve making slanderous statements, it involves some factually accurate realities that our Constitution provides for. And I think about what Senator Coburn was describing in terms of the balance of power. And we have 3 branches of of power here in the United States with the government, the executive branch, the legislative, and the judicial. And we've gotten so top-heavy and maybe even so reliant upon the court system that perhaps now is a good time for us to say, how can we, the people, restore some semblance of order, since those who are in these legislative and executive and judicial positions have lifetime appointments, it seems, and they don't really want to get out of it. Smashing the D.C. Monopoly, the book by Senator Tom Coburn, is up at thebottomlineshow.com, and also a link for Convention of States, and the number of people growing. More than 2.2 million so far have signed up for this. I'm encouraged that this is a phenomenon happening in 13 different states right now. If 21 more states will sign on for it, then we can have this happen in the U.S., and that would be a great day for America, in my humble opinion.
Sign the petition at cosaction.com and get as many of your friends and family to do the same. With your full address, your state legislators will know that you really are their constituents in their district. Our success depends on you, so we're inviting you to be part of history. Let's invoke the constitutional solution that's as big as the problem.